Hey, this is Mr. Ashi with Geometry, Chapter 1, Section 3. The last thing that we covered was actually Chapter 1, Section 1. We're actually going to skip over most of Chapter 1, Section 2, but I've included a couple of things in there from 1.2. Don't forget, you should always be following along by taking notes and then pausing if you need to as well. So one of the things from 1.2 is either called a postulate, which is what I'll refer to it, but it's also called an axiom. So a postulate is just a statement that's taken to be true. And then once we go over certain postulates, it's a statement that's taken to be true. So most of the time I would say it just makes sense, or it's pretty straightforward. In 1.1, we talked about segments, how to name segments, okay, how to draw segments. And if two segments have the same length, so let's just say I have a segment AB, which means A and B are the endpoints of the segment. Say it's 4 centimeters in length. And a second segment, CD, that's also 4 centimeters in length. Since those two segments have the same length, even though it could be 2 or more segments that have the same length, then those segments are called congruent segments. So congruent segments are 2 or more segments that have the same length. And then there's a few ways that you can show that segments are congruent. In 1.1, we talked about the correct way to name things. You need to make sure that you have that down and you can name things correctly. The same thing with showing that 2 segments are congruent. I'll show you the few different ways that you can show that, and you make sure that all the little parts are correct. So one way that I could show that those 2 segments are the same length, if I want to show it in the diagram or the segments themselves, even though it's labeled each of these segments are 4 centimeters, I could use what are known as tick marks. So on the segments themselves, I can just make a little slash is what it would look like, and that would show that those 2 segments are congruent. If I have 2 other segments, let's just say I have segments PQ and RS, and those segments are congruent with each other, but not necessarily congruent with my first 2 segments, A, B, and CD. I could also use tick marks, but to show that these 2 segments, PQ and RS, are congruent, I would actually use 2 tick marks like this. That shows that those 2 segments are congruent, and then it's a fact that those 2 segments are congruent without even having to find the measure, like 6 centimeters or whatever they are. Let's go back to segments A, B, and CD. Another way to show that they are congruent is by writing what's known as a congruent statement. Segments are congruent, their lengths are equal. So if I'm going to write a congruent segment, I want to have all the little parts correct to show that segment AB is congruent to segment CD. Here's a congruent statement, and I'm going to label it as such so you know that it is a congruent statement. But I have segment AB. Again, if you label it segment BA, it's the same thing, but with a little segment symbol on top. That's a small detail that you need to have in your congruent statement, otherwise it would not be correct, is congruent to. So the symbol congruent is an equal sign with a little squiggle mark on top. Or if some of you are taking Spanish, you have that little squiggle mark. I think it's just above the ends. It's called a tilde, but that's a symbol for congruence. So this statement right here, or that symbol means is congruent to. And that's how you read it. So segment AB is congruent to segment CD. If I just write it like this, that's not correct, because CD is a segment. As I was mentioning, segments are congruent, lengths are equal. Okay, to show the length of AB is equal to the length of CD, the lengths would not be congruent, but I could write the lengths are equal, like AB. If I just write AB, that's the length of AB, and then that's equal to the length of CD. kind of a lot of information right now. I should be going over this each time or just kind of reminding you that there's a correct way to write things, but that shows that the segment lengths are equal. We'll go over midpoint segment bisectors and an example in part 2.